And then he does his thing, and he walks over and he throws that on my arm, and I'm just like, holy shit. And he's like, rest in peace, Biggie, and walks out and laughs.
Real life.
It ain't real life. Just a real life street Starz. You know what time it is.
There's a lawsuit, and it's the Biggie son Jay Wallace lawsuit, right? Are you the John Doe?
I am. So let's, if you remembered from our interviews in the past, I would talk about, CJ Wallace working with Biggie's son,
Right.
with CJ Wallace working with Diddy and all that. And I think I did one interview where I was like, they need to look into CJ Wallace more, the feds. Remember I said that on your show?
I remember that.
And I was kind of like alluding to that, but I didn't obviously, go into detail about that. And I would see like, some of the comments on all the different platforms that I did, they'd always be like, seems like he's hiding something. It seems like, there's more to the story. And that's what it was. So, I got a law firm, the Dordick law firm. They've handled some of the biggest cases, in history. They have some of the biggest winnings in history. And we filed the civil lawsuit against Sean Combs, against CJ Wallace, against Willie Mack, and Combs corporations. All of them are listed on the defendants, that's out in public that can see all the defendants listed, right? So that's, and I talked about all those people like on your show before,
Right.
And that's just, we're in the process of it. They had me a John Doe to protect me. The lawyer did, but people have put it together, throughout, because in the lawsuit it talks about me working with Willie Mack and CJ Wallace and Diddy. And so, people aren't dumb. So a lot of people have asked me about it. I've denied it. I haven't spoke about it, but I feel like now's the time to do that and to talk about the lawsuit, because, TMZ put it up, all these different outlets, put it up, but they just kind of did it for headlines and clickbaits, and people haven't heard from me to explain and talk about what happened that's contained in the lawsuit.
Right. Jonathan.
Yes.
I'm gonna ask you to do something that's kind of a little hard. I know it's gonna be hard for you, but the people want to know exactly kind of, what kind of happened. You sent me paperwork, right? And I read through the paperwork, and I was devastated when I was reading a lot of this stuff. And I wanted to know if you could kind of walk us through what happened. Are you able to do that?
Yes, sir. So we did this Eric B. and Rakim project. That's Eric B. and Rakim, Follow the Leader, Reimagine His Jazz. And that hit, and it was #1 on the Billboard charts for 11 weeks. And so we were looking for another artist to do that similar type of thing. The girl I was dating at the time, her name was Sarah Rushforth. She's from London. We were in Brooklyn, and she said that we should do Biggie. My first response was like, I don't really want to do Biggie. That's predictable. Everybody does Biggie and Tupac. I'd rather do something like along the lines of what we did with like Eric B. and Rakim. Anyways, she talked me into it. But what was weird about all that is, like, looking back, is she told me, she says, if we do the Biggie music, we could get CJ Wallace involved, Biggie's son. And I'm like, how do you figure that? She was like, oh, it's magic. We'll get him. You're a magical person. So fast forward today into looking back and going through all the stuff that we went through, that was a setup by her because she had already known CJ Wallace. And we did this interview that you can see during the pandemic. It's still online with me, CJ Wallace, Willie Mack, and Sarah Rush. And I gave her credit. I was like, it was, her idea. She said she could get CJ Wallace. She suggested that we get CJ Wallace. And then we get him. And at the time, I'm just like, yo, I'm on a hot streak. We just had the #1 jazz album for 11 weeks. Now we got Biggie's son, to support this project, but she already knew him. And she was already a dancer. Like I met her at a strip club called Platinum Dolls. It's like right when you leave Quad Studios. It's where we recorded a lot of Follow the Leader. You walk directly next door. It's 2 steps over and you're in the strip club. So that's where I met her. And, I'm sure she finessed me, whatever. And I was a sucker, but over like a 2-week period, we were at the Williamsburg Hotel. And that's when she suggested this idea about doing Biggie. I didn't think that we'd really get CJ Wallace. But we did. We recorded the album. And sure enough, CJ Wallace reaches out and was like, I got wind of the project. I heard you're doing the project. We're a big fan of Eric B. and Rakim. My dad, Biggie, the Notorious Big, was a big fan of Eric B. and Rakim. We love what you're doing. We'd love for you to come out to Los Angeles. So we go to Los Angeles, right? I rented this big house, had a recording studio in the bottom. And we meet with CJ, we meet with Willie, the vibes are good. And then they want us to meet at this warehouse. And that's what's in the lawsuit, is the warehouse that we meet at. And so we're there for about 2 hours and we're listening to the music, we're doing photo shoots, we're partying and we're just, chilling. And then Diddy shows up. And that was unexpected, but, he showed up. And the reason that we were at this warehouse is because that was the warehouse this was in January of 2019. No, actually February and March of 2019. And that was the warehouse that was housing all of Biggie's clothes that he wore when he was alive. Right. And so the clothes that he wore when he was alive were all on these racks everywhere, like racks of all these clothes that he wore. And the reason that they were there is because they were donating them to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, which he was being inducted in November of 2020. So there was all Biggie's clothes. We're going through all these artifacts. I'm blown away. And CJ even says, yo, you should wear one of my dad's original jerseys. So obviously that was an honor. Here we are doing this Biggie project. And now I put on like some of his original garments. And we did some photo shoots and everything else. Well, so when Puffy comes in, he's like going through the clothes and he was like, nah, you should do this one, almost like a stylist. Because as you know, Diddy's #1 artist of all time is Biggie, the Notorious Big. That's his #1 artist. So at that point, he was still very controlling of the Notorious Big, his music, his brand, everything else. And so he was like, nah, you should wear this one. You should try on that one. Right. He closes the door. The door's closed. And, I've got like my t-shirt on. And I'm just like putting on, different Biggie's clothes. He's got some like in this couch next to him that are like piled up because he's also grabbing clothes that they're donating to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Right. So he's got all these clothes on there. And I'm just looking through everything, not all the different clothes, just blown away by, what I'm looking at, an artist that has passed, one of the most historical artists of all time. you know, the greatest bisexual rapper of all time is Biggie Smalls. And so I'm going through all those clothes, and I hear Diddy on his phone, and I didn't know if he was on FaceTime or whatever, but I could hear, like, you know, it sounded like, right? And so I'm just like, you know, I'm not trying to like stare over at him and look over at him and all that type shit, right? So I'm just kind of minding my business, but also kind of in tune to what Diddy's doing. Everybody's out in the other, you know, rooms. The music is playing loud, you know, that we did. And it's just Diddy and I in this room with all of Biggie's clothes. Next thing you know, it's like I look over and it's like this dude is looking on his phone and he's like jerking off underneath one of the shirts. So I'm just kind of tripping, like, nah, maybe he's scratching himself. Maybe he's, you know, it can't be what's going on. But sure enough, that's what he's doing, because he's like, as he's getting into it, he's like, yo, bro, finish me off. And I'm just like, nah. So, you know, he finishes off into one of Biggie's garments that he wore, and, you know, like a nut towel or something. And then he does his thing, and he walks over and he throws that on my arm, and I'm just like, holy shit. And he's like, rest in peace, Biggie, and walks out and laughs. And I'm stunned. Because what the was that, right? And it was shocking because it's also Biggie's clothes, you know, like his shirt. And that's the part of the lawsuit that went viral at first. And everybody was like, you know, like making fun of it. Like, what do you mean, you know, Diddy masturbated into Biggie's shirt? So, you know, I put the shirt down. I like brush it off. I'm like, okay, we flew in, we're in LA. All these people are out there. And I go out there, I see my girl. And at that point, I'm just like stunned. You know, she's like, what's wrong? I don't tell anything. I'm like, I'm going to go outside and smoke a cigarette. I'm outside smoking a cigarette, just trying to keep my composure, because I'm thinking about the project that we've done, the album that was finished. I didn't really know what to do. So I didn't do anything.
Shout out Reallyfe Street Starz, nigga. Move. Hey.